Hey everyone, it's Paige. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a monthly wrap-up, and even though I'm running a little bit behind, this is my June 2020 wrap-up, which I'm actually pretty excited about this one because I finished 8 books in June, and even though, I try to read as much as I can, sometimes I don't read as much as I should. So, most months I average around 4 to 5 books, but this month, 8 books. So I'm really proud of myself, and I'm really excited to share with you the books that I've read. Without further ado, let's get into it. The first book I finished in June, I actually finished this on June 1st, was My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. This is a young adult paranormal horror novel about 2 best friends, Abby and Gretchen, who have been friends since elementary school, and this book follows them in their high school years. Basically, what happens is Abby and Gretchen go for a midnight swim, and Gretchen resurfaces acting very, very strangely, and it is Abby's belief that she has actually been possessed. It's also set during the 80s, and when I say it's set during the 80s, I mean it's set during the 80s. There isn't a page that goes by that Grady Hendrix is not reminding you that this is in the 80s. So in that way, this book is actually kind of reminiscent of Stranger Things, even though I would say if you like Stranger Things, I wouldn't necessarily say that you're going to love this. I hauled this book, and you can actually see the haul where I got this book above, but I hauled this book because I'm a big fan of Jennifer's Body. I've always loved dark comedy, I always loved that movie and book, and so when I heard about this book, I was really, really tempted by it, and I guess suffice to say that I gave this book 3 stars. For me, 3 stars symbolizes that I liked this book but didn't love it. I felt like it was kind of predictable. At the same time, I did like those 80s references and inspirations, but I did feel like the characters did fall short a little bit. I actually heard someone compare this to a cheesy horror B-movie, if that's what you call it. I'm not a film connoisseur, but and I can see why those comparisons are made. With that being said, if you do like the 80s, if you like Jennifer's Body, you like Stranger Things, I would say give it a go. It's not a huge book, and I don't regret reading it. It's just not one of my favorite horror books. But before we move on, I do just want to quickly comment on how much I love the book cover. It looks like a VHS tape. Whoever designed this cover is kind of a genius. And the back is even, it looks like the back of a VHS tape. It's just so super 80s. So like I said, if you're into the 80s, that is what will carry you through this book most of all. So after I finished My Best Friend's Exorcism, I was really in the mood for more horror. So I picked up another book that I hauled very recently called The Troop by Nick Cutter. While the last book was young adult, this is definitely not young adult. This is a straight up horror science fiction thriller. There are so many gruesome, gory things in this book that I would definitely warn you about. If you're really sensitive to those sort of things, don't read this book. Straight up, just don't read it. This is about a group of scouts who go on a weekend trip to this isolated island in Canada, and this is a tradition for them. So they have this little cabin set up, they have their scoutmaster Tim who looks out for them, and they're just this misfit gang of teenage boys. And as they're on this island, a man arrives on the shore. He seems like he needs medical assistance, and Scoutmaster Tim tries to help him, but in doing so, quite a lot happens that is very unfortunate for everyone involved. First of all, I didn't know that this was science fiction whatsoever. I think I saw this suggested on Goodreads, and I had seen that Stephen King reviewed this 5 stars, I think, so I was really, really excited about it. But I did end up giving this 3 stars, so like I said for the last book, I liked it, but did not love it. In fact, I would be tempted to say that this kind of is barely 3 stars for me, and I do hate to say that because there are so many themes in this book that I think a lot of people would enjoy if you like horror, and as for myself, I do love horror. But I felt like the characters in this book didn't really feel kids or preteens. That kind of retracted from my buying into the story. First of all, The other thing that was actually surprisingly difficult about reading this book was that the setting is very limited, and it actually ended up kind of boring me a little bit. I do really think that the concept of the book is really, really cool, or at least very interesting. It's sci-fi, but then again, it's a very, you know, I think believable sci-fi. Like, I could definitely see this sort of thing happening, and if, like I said, the characters were just a little bit more believable, I could see myself actually being pretty scared by this book. I would say if you're looking for old school science fiction horror, go ahead and pick this up. I would encourage you to give it a try and see what you think. But anyway, moving on. At that point, I was feeling something a little bit more lighthearted, so I picked up The Bride Test by Helen Hoang. This is an adult contemporary romance following kind of like two perspectives. So the first perspective is from a character that we actually met in the first book in this series, which was The Kiss Quotient, and that character is Kai, who is the cousin of one of the main characters in the first book, and Kai has autism, and so it kind of affects the way that he perceives or pursues romantic relationships, and his mother decides that she is going to find him a bride in Vietnam. In Vietnam, she finds the perfect bride, a girl named Esme, and Esme, a single mother who is extremely poor, agrees to fly off to America to meet Kai and live with him to see if she can I don't know, persuade him to marry her. It's an interesting setup for a book, I have to be honest. Like, reading it, I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to think of it, but actually executed, it was really good. I actually really enjoyed it. The Kiss Quotient is probably my favorite romance novel, so I guess it doesn't really surprise me that I ended up loving this. I think I still prefer the first book because Esme's character to me was a little bit flat, if not just a little wishy-washy. Like, not a lot. I'm not really picking on the book that much, but Esme, she seemed kind of like back and forth. I really enjoyed that, you know, she wasn't this like mail order bride that was just like sent to America to do nothing but like seduce a man, and actually she was really interested in pursuing her own education and learning English and, you know, helping her family. Like, I love all that stuff, but I still felt like at certain times there was a little bit more that I wanted from her. Kai himself, he was obviously endearing. It's just that, you know, I didn't pay as much attention to his character as much as I did Esme, just because Esme, I feel like, is the main protagonist, and she has the most to win or lose during this whole plot, so that's the only reason why I have something to say slightly negative about Esme, whereas I don't have anything specific to say about Kai. If I were to be completely honest, of course, I'd probably say this is 4.5. I think I went a little bit crazy when I gave it 5 stars, but that should just tell you that I really enjoyed the experience of reading it. And if you like romance, I highly encourage you to read The Kiss Quotient and read this book. If you've already read The Kiss Quotient, this is a perfect book to follow up with. So the next book I read, before I even tell you what it is, I want to tell you that I stayed up until 8 a.m. to finish this book. So I probably started this book like, I don't know, halfway through the day or something. And then I literally could not put it down. That's just a heads up. But the book is Serpent Dove by Shelby Mahurin. This is a young adult fantasy novel, and it has been a while since I read a young adult fantasy series, so I have heard you guys talk so much about this series, like just so much good about this series. I've seen Goodreads talk about this series. I've seen my other booktubers talk about this series. I couldn't resist the temptation anymore, so I picked it up, and this book follows 2 perspectives. The first perspective is a witch named Louise LeBlanc, and she has fled her coven, so she is living in a city that is very much kind of like Paris. This whole setting is definitely inspired by like French culture. There's some like French language that's incorporated into the story. But the other perspective is a man named Reed Diggory, who has become a chasseur, I think, for the church. So basically he's like this holy warrior, and his mission, his purpose in life, like all his other chasseurs, is to kill witches. Long story short, what happens is Lou and Reed end up being engaged in holy matrimony. So a witch and a witch hunter are now married. And really the bulk of the book is about this like budding relationship between them that is tainted by the fact that Reed has no idea that Lou is a witch. I loved this book so much. I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads. It was exactly what I wanted. It was like this perfect, like heady mix of like romance and fantasy, and I loved it so much. I read some reviews about Lou's character that were not so positive, and mostly they were kind of unhappy with her sense of humor, or just like they felt like she was childish. She definitely is childish. She is an extremely childish character. But also, I don't know if it's just I have a bad sense of humor, but I absolutely loved her sense of humor. It was hilarious. I would laugh out loud at moments in this book. And that like humor mixed with the romance, mixed with this action, I just loved it all. I loved it so much. Highly recommend this if you like Sarah J. Maas, but you also like the more mature writing of Leigh Bardugo. I'm very excited to read the sequel for this. I will definitely be getting that sequel, and I will be telling you guys how I feel about that too. Alright, we're chugging along. Okay. So, the next 2 books that we are going to talk about are also 2 very, very, very popular young adult fantasies. I read The Cruel Prince many months ago, last year probably sometime, and even though I had purchased the sequel immediately, I for some reason just didn't continue with the series. And you know, I was tired of not knowing what happened, so I finished the series. So of course we have The Wicked King and The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black, this is the 2nd book, and this is the 3rd book in the trilogy. Like I said, this is a young adult fantasy, and it follows a girl named Jude, and she is a human living in the Fae realm. Her parents were actually killed by a redcap who is weirdly like her stepfather now. He like took her in after he murdered her parents. It's really weird. It sounds like it wouldn't make a good story, but it actually is a really good story. Jude grows up not having the same power as her like peers, because obviously they're Fae and she's human, and so she tries extra hard to be cunning and to practice her sword skills and to just do everything she can to like make herself into the best possible human, and that is good and bad. She falls into a lot of traps because of that desire to be as good as the Fae. Because Jude ends up in certain situations, she ends up kind of in this weird alliance with her arch nemesis, who is named Carden. And Carden is a prince of the Fae, and their hatred of one another is legendary, because it's not just hatred, it is also extreme just attraction. So the whole series, I would say, is mostly focused on that love-hate relationship. Obviously the plot that's behind that focal relationship is very intriguing as well. I especially like the dichotomy between like this fantasy world, this Fae fantasy world, and the very modern human world. So Jude has kind of the freedom to walk between, you know, the human realm, where there's, you know, Denny's and just regular life is happening, and the Fae realm where, you know, people have tails and, you know, there's like mermaids and stuff. I gave this book 5 stars because this is just jam-packed with stuff to freak out about, and I gave this book 4 stars just because I felt like it was very short. It summarized, or it like skipped past a lot that I would actually be really interested in reading, but even still it got 4 stars because I really did. I liked the resolution. Definitely one of my favorite young adult fantasies. I guess now instead of having a vampire addiction, I have a Fae addiction. So thank you, Sarah J. Maas, Holly Black. You have kind of ruined my life. So anyway, the next to the last book that I have to show you, I actually was reading this in my last reading blog. If you haven't seen that video, it'll be above. But that book is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. I've heard people say that this is young adult. I've heard people say that it's not young adult. I don't really know, but I'm gonna go with adult. This is a adult fantasy, and once again, this is kind of like a split perspective novel about a boy named Kel. Basically, his ability is that he can transfer between worlds, and in this universe that he's living in, there are 4 Londons. So, in his London, Red London, magic is aplenty. The world is happy. There's a nice balance between magic and non-magic. In White London, there is still magic, but it is dwindling slowly, leaving the residents of White London to struggle trying to, you know, harness as much power as they can in this dying world. And then there's Grey London, which has no magic whatsoever, and it is basically, you know, our world. Grey London is our world. And last of all, there is Black London. Black London, we don't talk about no more, because Black London ended up like imploding or something. Basically what happens in this universe is if magic runs rampant and it is unchecked, you know, it's chaos. It has to be tempered by, you know, the human will. So Black London fell to magic, and it is no longer really on the map. So Kel traverses between the three Londons, and he is known as the Red Traveler. He carries messages from his royal family to the Grey royal family and the White London family. The only problem with this is that Kel likes to smuggle things sometimes. So he's a little bit of a daredevil, I guess. I don't like to call Kel a daredevil because he's not actually, but he smuggles some things, and that gets him into quite a bit of trouble. And in that trouble, he ends up meeting a girl named Delilah Bard. Lila is a thief in Grey London, and Lila's goal is to travel the world. She wants to be a pirate, she wants her own ship, she wants to have adventure. And meeting Kel, she realizes that she can have the adventure of a lifetime. So Kel and Lila end up in this weird alliance, and, you know, things happen in the book, you know. I have weirdly a lot to say about this series. I have finished the second book, but that was in July, so I'm not gonna talk about that book, but I will say, you know, my thoughts on this book. So I gave this book 4 stars. There are so many things in this book that I loved a lot. Obviously the concept of the different Londons is really intriguing, but with that being said, the reason why I gave it 4 stars is because, you know, this is a very fast-paced, very plot-focused kind of book. It's very, you know, linear, very straight line, you know, this is what's happening now. I feel like the characters kind of took a backseat to that, and, you know, that's fine. But for me, I love characters. I love, you know, interactions between the characters. I love all of that stuff. And I just felt like by the end of this book, I wasn't sure, you know, who these characters were exactly. I had slight impressions of their personalities, and I wanted that so much from this book, and I just didn't get it. So I gave this 4 stars because of that lacking aspect, but it feels very strongly inspired by The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra, because it is inspired by those settings. If you like The Last Airbender, you like fantasy, you like the concept that I just described to you, then please go ahead and give it a try. These books really do just get better over time. Okay, the last book that I want to tell you about is Darkdawn by Jay Kristoff. Yeah, I finally read this. This is the 3rd and final book in the Nevernight Chronicles. If you do not know anything about this series, it is about Mia Korovir, who is this girl who witnessed the execution of her father as like a young child, because her father was in a plot to overthrow the standing like rulers, therefore he was executed for it, and also her mother and little brother were thrown into prison. Mia, very, very luckily, was able to escape all of that. To make things short, after Mia, you know, finds a new home, and she discovers that she is what is known as a Darkin, which means that she can manipulate shadows and darkness, she decides that she's going to go on a, you know, a mission of vengeance. She wants to kill all those involved in her father's execution, and to do that, she decides that she is going to become a member of the Red Church. The Red Church is this, you know, church that worships the goddess of night, which is very forbidden because in this world that Mia is living in, there is only, you know, daylight. So there are 3 suns in the sky, and there is never a night. Get it? Never night? Except, you know, like I think once a year or something, there's like a couple days of night, of darkness. That really just touches the surface of what this series is. Obviously that is the synopsis of the first book because I don't want to spoil or anything else. I will say that I gave this 5 stars. There are many reasons I gave this 5 stars, and I'm sure, you know, there are things that I could say that are slightly negative or critiques of this that I could give you. But the main thing that you know, made me give it 5 stars is the development of the history of this series. So Jay Kristoff is really fond of footnotes in this series. He loves building this world for you. You know, to do that sometimes he has to make like 2-page long footnotes, and all of that world building came to a head in this book. Everything was like explained. There's a great finale in that way. Obviously to me, you know, Mia is hilarious, so I love reading, you know, from her perspective. I love reading, you know, her interactions with people. So that was the last book that I read in June. I don't think I've ever had to tell you like my thoughts on that many books in one video. I'm not gonna drag out this ending since it was so long. I just will tell you that I'm really glad that I got back into young adult fantasy. I feel like I was kind of leaning away from it for a while, and now I'm back on it. I am curious to know, what did you guys read during June? You know, did you read any of these books by chance, or did you read some other really good stuff? If you would please let me know below in the comments. That is it for this video. I really hope you liked it. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you have not already, go ahead and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads, which is where I post all of my updates for the books that I'm reading. And with all that being said, I hope you have a very good week. Bye!